So, Bryan, uh, you've made a lot of changes over the last year. You've been doing a lot.
I have, yeah. So when we talked last year, I was at a startup that I still work with, still advise, but I'm not an employee there. And I left because I had a mission. I had a purpose that I had to fulfill, right? So
Oh,
I was, for people who didn't hear the last episode, like I was 20 years on the...
Buckle up. It's the Insurance Dudes podcast.
Boom!
boom!
Bryan Falchuck, number 2.
Deuce.
Number
The deuce.
Bryan, it's been, what, a year?
Yeah, you know what? It was when I was at Connected Claims last year, and Connected Claims just happened last week. So it's been 53 long
Oh, wow.
weeks. Yeah.
And you were
I know you've missed us.
You were you in the hotel room?
Yeah, it was in the Marriott Marquis in Chicago. I'd just checked in and made it upstairs just in time to connect with you guys. It's a
And you were
little
talking
hairy,
about and you were talking about how exciting insurance conventions are.
Yeah, no, they're awesome. It's almost too much. And so, they've all been canceled right now and moved virtually just so we can, maybe for other reasons too, but we've also been able to calm down.
Yeah.
Contain your excitement.
Yeah.
So, Bryan, you've made a lot of changes over the last year. You've been doing a lot.
I have, yeah. So when we talked last year, I was at a startup that I still work with, still advise, but I'm not an employee there. And I left because I had a mission. I had a purpose that I had to fulfill, right? So I was, for people who didn't hear the last episode, I was 20 years on the carrier side in P&C, and then went to the InsurTech side. And throughout that process, I kept running into the same conversation about, we're all stuck. We all got lots of constraints in the industry, whether it's regulation or culture or whatever. And customers are demanding us to change. They want a different customer experience. And you've got a lot of startups that are pushing us to do that too, because they're doing it. And so carrier after carrier having that same feeling of we're under pressure and we don't know what to do about it because we can't. And I was obviously able to help them through that struggle, or else startup wouldn't have continued in business. We wouldn't have made any sales. But that's not really good enough for me. It's fine that I help those carriers, but the conversation needs to be had more broadly, because there's basically the whole industry is feeling it. So just trying to, spread that out. And that's what brought me back to you guys. This is this book that I've been working on that just came out. That's trying to tell that story about how we can innovate and evolve as an industry despite all the constraints that we face. Because we can, but it takes some changes.
That's awesome. Yeah. So what's the name of the book? And can we jump into that a little bit?
Yeah. So the book's called The Future of Insurance: From Disruption to Evolution. And it's basically a discussion of that place that I think as an industry collectively we find ourselves in. I mean, you guys have been hearing it for decades, the agent channel is going to go away. Agents will be dead. There'll be no more agents. And that's not true. It's never been true. And I don't think it will ever be. I think there's a lot of value in the agent and broker channel. But now it's also and here are these new carriers who are starting up. And so traditional carriers will be dead too. So agents and carriers, everyone's going to die. And I don't think that's the case, but there's a lot of change coming. So how do we deal with that? And then I moved from that conversation into 7 case studies with 7 carriers who opened up, firsthand. I talked to the people at the carriers who did some pretty innovative things despite those constraints to keep moving their business forward. And then the question is, so what do you learn from that?
Yeah. So what can you mention those 7 carriers? Because I know the last time you weren't allowed
to be all secretive. Yeah. So the 7 carriers, and I'll try to do this in order. This is how I challenge my mind to stay sharp. CSAA, so largest AAA carrier based out in California. CNA. Number 3 is, I'm buying time so I can remember it, the State Compensation Insurance Fund of California, SCIF. Number 4 is Ohio Mutual, which is a mutual based in Ohio. People who don't know them, they're awesome, but they're bigger than Ohio, but that's their headquarters.
You wouldn't guess from that name.
No, they're from, although, you know what, I will say Indiana Insurance, part of Liberty Mutual I used to work with, their headquarters in Ohio. So you never know. You never know.
You never know.
Yeah. All right. So where are we at? We're number 4. Number 5 is employers. We got monoline comp carrier. Number 6 is AXA XL. In particular, their construction business, their large, like risk engineered construction vertical. And then the last one is this little company out of Texas called USAA. So you got a good story from them. The first 6 are all about like a specific kind of innovation that was done, and USAA's broadens out, and it's actually about innovation. So they had a thriving innovation function and community there, and they decided they needed to make the next evolution of it. So how do you do that? So it was a nice one to end on. Like let's take the whole idea of innovation and see where that's heading, and how do we keep that fresh and moving us forward.
Interesting. Any some interesting takeaways from?
Yeah, you want me to give away the book? I can give
no,
away.
No, yeah,
like meat.
Little
I'm
teasers.
not giving
Just
away
tease
free
me.
copies, but I actually I'm fine talking about the main ideas that come out of it, because I think like if it's interesting and people want more, they'll get more.
Totally.
But there are 3 big ideas that come out of it, and some people are a little bit surprised that an innovation book, none of the ideas is tech, because it's not about that. Like tech will change. You know, like I could say, oh, this is the cloud solution you need to use, but like, okay, that's from Amazon and you're a Microsoft shop, so you can't do that. So it's like, does that mean you don't do anything in the cloud? Like it's situational, right? It depends what you're trying to solve for. So it's not about tech. It's actually about culture and values and leadership. So the first one is all about your customers. Like your customers hold the answers. The key is to actually ask them and then listen to what they say. And those are 2 distinct things, and both critical. And I've seen carriers and agents and brokers and TPAs and IAs and everyone claim to be doing either or both of those things, but not really. And so you miss out. And you guys know Coverager, right? Sheffy from Coverager had this really good comment that we're in an industry where the customers are indifferent. And so if you're working on something they don't care about, you shouldn't be working on it. And I don't agree with that 100%, because there's a lot of stuff we have to work on in this industry that customers definitely don't care about.
Right.
That, like there's stuff we have to do that keep the lights on. But if it's customer facing or it has an impact on them, it should be something they care about. So
got to be relevant.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you guys know, like you can't go into a meeting with a prospect or an existing client and start talking to them about stuff they don't care about and expect anything to come from that meeting other than wasting everyone's time. So like you got to listen what's out there.
Yep.
And the second one is similar, but looking internally, and that's your people. So like your staff, your associates, your frontline folks who are actually interacting with those customers and doing the work and stuck in those parts of the process that are painful. They actually have most of the ideas for what will make you better. It's not just going to come from the C-suite or the leaders or the managers or whatever. Like everyone should be participating in that. A, because they actually know. B, because they're the ones who are going to have to live with the change. So getting their insights and their thoughts on it means not only will you build it better, but you'll have them bought in from the start because they were part of the solution. And C, because then you're changing their mindset going forward, because now they're about making things better and being a part of where the company's heading. And that's something every carrier talks about, but a lot of them struggle with, that employee engagement. So here's a really good chance to drive that a lot stronger.
Well, Bryan, why do you think that they struggle with getting that employee engagement?
I think it's been a difficult thing in the industry as a whole for a variety of reasons. One is like, it's tough work. You think about on the claim side, like you get hit with the worst things that people are going through, which is depressing. Like first responders go through that too. When like there's famous stories of rescue dogs in 9/11 that they were getting so depressed finding bodies, they started to plant live people every like 5 to 10, not live people that they found, just because the dogs wouldn't search anymore. Like it does hit, like if we're on a claims team, it's hard.
Well,
You listen to the worst of the worst, and as empathetic as you are doing that work, like it starts to hit you. So part of it is the job. And let's be fair, like a lot of people presume their carrier's out to screw them, not support them.
Right.
So a lot of those calls, not only is it a bad story, but like it's adversarial at the beginning. You're facing off against them. Same thing with sales is a lot of no's So you have to be optimistic because, not every one of those quotes is going to play out into a policy, or every one of those leads is going to play out into a quote.
Right.
And people are presuming you're kind of screwing them, or there's a catch, or you're holding back, and you're not buying a stereotypical used car purchase. Like, it doesn't have to be that way, but that's there. So I think people are a little bit beat down by the nature of the interaction, the work, and the systems, and the processes. So that it tempers the excitement. And the real reason to me is, historically, as an industry, and plenty of industries suffer from this, we haven't been great at engaging them. And now all of a sudden it's important, and we care, and we do free lunches or whatever other, but like, what are you doing day to day to reinforce that people have a voice and they're empowered and they can take risks and they should feel like they're owners of the business too? And I think that's something the startup world does really well, is because they can't afford to pay anyone with actual money. They give a lot of shares. So technically, like, everyone who's grinding it out, trying to make that business a success, is probably an owner to some degree. There's a lot of value in that, assuming that we'll take that seriously. So I think as an industry, we need to keep finding ways to do better on engagement, even if for no other reason than the work itself is kind of working against that on a day in, day out basis.
It's so interesting that people, like the general public, has this perception of insurance and insurance carriers, which then leads to the employees come, and before they were employees, they were customers, right? So they come with this pre-built in, pre-wired, and we find it with the salespeople. And so maybe it needs to start back one step with the consumer. And I think they're trying. I mean, how can they make faster progress?
Yeah. So I think we need to change the message, and I think there has been progress here. I think it's going to be slow and steady. One of the things is we need to get off the joke about how uncool it is to be in insurance. Like, that's
right.
Oh, you work in insurance. Great. Can we talk about something else? Like, actually, you know what? It's an incredibly interesting industry. There's a ton going on. There's a lot of innovation and a lot of really cutting edge tech that people just don't hear about outside of, like, we all get it because all we hear is AI and ML and blockchain and whatever else. But, like, what other industries are using drones the way that we are, or AI, other than like the military? Most people don't work with drones on a daily basis unless it's for personal use or, they're in the military. That's pretty cool. Like, there's actually a lot going on. Blockchain is not changing many industries other than, like, kids who are investing in Bitcoin or whatever. And there is a lot of experimentation and early moves going on in insurance around blockchain. And it's for uncool things like Subro, but you know how many billions of dollars that is? It's a huge deal. So you start to get under it, and it's like, actually, we are doing a lot of really interesting stuff. There's a lot of startup activity. There's a lot of VC activity. So it's actually a pretty interesting industry. And by the way, the core of it is putting people's lives back together when they've been shattered, which is like, it's super important. When people are like, oh, it's not brain surgery, and you're not curing cancer. It's like, no, but those people have lost their home and everything they own. So I know it's not curing cancer, but like, my friends of mine, their house just burnt down. Like, their lives are shattered right now. So their insurance companies put them, and they're like in a rental house, and I couldn't believe how buoyant they sounded when they just lost everything. But that's because of the process they've been through and how they got stood behind. So it's not terrible. And I think we need to change that tone as an industry.
Yeah. And the only way you find that out is through tragedy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the people that haven't had it has that connotation.
People who haven't had it are just paying money they wish they weren't paying and getting nothing back for it, right? So that's the rub. And then there are some carriers, particularly like one startup that I can think of, that starts every ad with "insurance companies suck." And so it's like a political ad, right? They're like, our competitors are boring and unfun, and we're like, okay, you're not doing anyone any favors. And by the way, you're not actually that innovative. So it's a fast quote. Guess what? Lots of people have fast quotes, whether they're old or new. The customer experience after purchase is not great. The claims handling is not great. So why are you trash talking? Like, why don't you sell your virtues instead of selling because of this false sense of how lame everyone else is. Like Uber doesn't go around being like taxis are stupid. They didn't have to, you know?
Right. Well,
Postmates isn't
think
like,
about
you want to
that.
go pick up your own food?
Yeah.
No, it's just like, hey, isn't this great?
Yep.
Right.
What were you-
It is interesting. They're putting the spotlight on the one part of it that really doesn't matter and everybody can do pretty similar, the
Yeah.
quoting.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, no, that's not the important part. The important part is when you have that devastating loss, they're there for you.
Yeah.
Because what could be worse than losing your house and then getting the runaround?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, awful.
Yeah.
Right.
100%. Yeah. And like, so like you can get a renter's quote in 2 minutes or whatever from a particular drink named startup. Like that's great.
Horseshoes.
Like I just got I got E&O coverage, which is not nearly as simple as renter's insurance. I got that quote and bound the policy in under 3 minutes. So I don't know what they're singing about. 3.5 if you include them charging my credit card, so it wasn't technically bound. But still, like, this is not 1998. Okay, like online quoting is ubiquitous. It's super fast. There's lots of third-party data sources, so you're not filling in information generally. It's a different world. So let's truly innovate and sing our own praises. We don't need to trash talk each other. So I think it's a combination of all those things, Craig, that just kind of change the conversation about the industry, but that's a slow burn.
Yeah. And so what did you so let's continue. So that's where the innovation and that's halfway through the book. Where do we go from there?
Well, so that was the end of the book, is the key takeaways, but like each of the cases has its own set of insights from it. And there's something about each of those cases that's like, yeah, there's a particular technology or particular thing that they did, and hopefully that's interesting to people. But what I'm hoping they get is like, you read that case and you should be identifying with something about what's going on in there, whether or not you're working on the same thing or not. So like CNA, they worked with this French company called Shift Technology to have this AI model that helps identify fraud. And by the way, people think like, oh, so they're going to be policing everyone. Good identification of fraud also means you're not having false positives. And that was one of their main concerns. So that's like flagging people for fraud that aren't committing fraud. That's workers' comp and auto. So you think about comp, like someone's been injured on the job, they're in pain, they can't work, and now you're going to start investigating them for fraud, which even if they don't know you're doing it, it will slow down the claim process because there's more work going on. So if you can rightly not do that, it means their experience, their recovery is going to be better. So actually having a fraud model like that is not about calling everyone fraudulent and being better at nailing them. It's also about not going through the investigation where you shouldn't. And those models are going to pick out the things you would never catch because you can't see universally the way a model can, and help you understand why just because something looked fishy to you doesn't mean it is. Like maybe the last 3 similar claims were all suspicious, rightfully so. Just because this one presents the same way, it doesn't mean it's fraud. But there's nuances that you as a human being, no matter how skilled you are never going to pick out because you're not looking across like 12 million claims. You know, you're only thinking across everything that you've seen, which might be a lot, but is not enough to really overcome some of those biases. So that's a really cool story, but it's also like CNA is 112 years old, something like that.
Wow.
You know, large company, they've changed a lot recently. So like in the past 5-10 years. So, you know, lots of structural changes, leadership changes. And then you have this French company that's never done anything in the US. It's like this AI model in fraud. It could be a threat to your existing staff. They could see it as replacing them. Like there's all these nuances that are like, how are they able to move quickly on it? Like they had the thing live pretty fast.
That's awesome.
And we go through that story. So it's just a bit of like, oh, well, we're too big for that, or we're too structured. We have too many rules. Like I've seen CNAs, like their vendor questionnaires. I can tell you, I'm not knocking CNA. I think they're perfectly normal. But if you think you have too many, you're in good company. Let's just say it like that. They do their due diligence, rightfully so. So for anyone who's like, oh yeah, they had it, or they've got billions of dollars, it's easy for them. Okay, well, Ohio Mutual doesn't. They're like 250 million. They're mutual. So it's like, well, those guys are a stock company. They can just go raise money, or, these guys are mutual. So they can't just go raise money. They can't just issue shares and whip up cash.
Yeah.
Like there's new SCIF, the state comp fund in California. Not only are they a state entity, so they report to the governor. Like, you talk about internal politics, like those are actual politics.
Yeah.
And their
Governor
staff
Newsom.
yeah. The staff's
Everyone's favorite.
I'm not going.
Sorry.
But the staff are all civil servants and they're unionized. So I can't think of another insurance company, like insurance industry company, where like claims adjusters and attorneys are unionized. Like, that's a company. You talk about changing the way people work and doing training, and like, you have to get the unions okay on all those things. So if you think that your staff are not engaged or they don't like change, yeah, but they're not unionized. So if you really need to change, that is a decision you can make on your own, and you can push ahead whether they're on board or not. Doesn't mean you should, but SCIF doesn't have that luxury. They have to take a totally different tack. So for anyone who's like, oh, well, that's great for them, but we can't because our complications are real. I promise you, everyone's complications are real. And someone in that book is going through something you're going through. So my hope is, like, that case, even if they're working on something you're not working on, something in that resonates for you. And it's like, oh, yeah, they're just like us. I get it now. I see how they were able to overcome that, or how they engaged their staff where we thought you never could. I just had a call yesterday with a carrier. They're like, we're struggling with how to do this. And I was like, well, did you ask your team? I'm like, oh, yeah, we could just ask them if they want to do it. I'm like, yeah, you could. Then, like, and if they say no, you were going to say no to begin with. But what if they say yes, which is what you wish would happen? Great.
Right.
It just didn't even occur to them, like, oh, we could actually ask our staff if they want this tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Folks are so scared of asking, like doing the obvious, asking the staff, asking, like we say it all the time. Hey, I wonder if so-and-so would like it if we did this contest. Well, did you ask?
Yeah.
I mean, ask what they want.
Yeah.
It's so simple. You mentioned AI.
Yeah.
We just recently had a guest on that his whole thing was AI, and it's such an interesting subject. Anything to, like, what are your thoughts on that in the future of insurance, and does the book touch on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, so there's some AI stuff in there. I think a lot of AI isn't actually AI yet. And people hear it and they're like, oh, that's just a buzzword. And the reality is it's just some really good if-then logic that people have written out. And a lot of the chatbots work that way. They're just looking for specific words and then they have a canned response instead of actually like learning and adjusting. So just because that might be the current state of play doesn't mean that will always be. And one of the things about AI, or really what you want to be thinking about ultimately, is machine learning, so that the process and the algorithms figure out a better path and see different patterns and know how to respond. Those take time to learn, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but you have to start somewhere. And so AI and ML become a conversation where there's a lot of like, oh, but we can't get there, or it's not going to give us the value today. You can't have both. You can't be poor. You can't claim to be poor and drive a Ferrari. Like, you have to pick one or the other. Right. So this is a case where, like, you know what? You should play around. You should find some pockets where you can pilot and try and grow, because as you do that, the knowledge base grows and the solutions get smarter. And the cool thing is, and this is one of the big differences, is if you've grown up in the industry, tech and innovation are scary because they're huge projects. I was saying to someone, it's like you're in year 8 of a 3-year new system initiative. It's like, wait, you mean the other way around, right? Year 3 of an 8. I'm like, no, it was a 3-year initiative and you're on year 8, because that's the way these things go, right? Like, that's what we think of. It's this huge process, and we're going to spend like 5 times more than we thought, and it's going to be half as good as we hoped in 10 times the time. The reality is there's a whole new generation of tools out there that are much more flexible. You can deploy them in bits and pieces. You can run them on the side and see, if they work out before you commit more to them. And the way that we can integrate is totally different today through APIs. So it doesn't have to be this huge IT endeavor. That's all just totally different. So you can play around with AI without being like $100 million, like 300 person endeavor. Like, it can be mean, there's some of these things. It's like, it's a team of 6 working on something for $1 billion business, like something transformational for $1 billion business. The XXL case, that's a unit that's now generated $4 billion in premium. And the project team that did all the innovation here at its core is 5 people. And then they had this tech company outside. And of course, they always had the ideas when the budget was basically spent. Like, things come to light, it's like, oh, we got to do this. And it's like, we have 50 grand left in the budget. How are we going to do this? That's the other thing. And I think that's changing today, especially, in the context of COVID-19, is like, there's all these digital interaction initiatives that if you have the money, whether you budgeted it or not, you have the money and it's a net positive, or it's a necessity now. I've seen some carriers are like, well, we'll have to budget for that next year. It's like, you're not going to get the chance. So I get it if you actually don't have the capital to do it, or you can't readjust things so that you create the capital. But making those decisions based on what's in your business plan is rational business management. And you need to have some flexibility, because you are going to come across situations that you didn't plan for, or opportunities that are the ROI is so solid, and you need to get working on them, that you do need to be able to flex. And I just saw a carrier yesterday who's like, normally we'd say like, yeah, we're good to go. We'll budget it for 2021. And then we'll reevaluate. And that means when budgeting time comes around, like, is the CFO going to cut that project? Or
Right.
It's just like, we actually have the cash, even though this wasn't budgeted. And this has been such a benefit in the free pilot that we got, because a lot of startups will do that. Like, it's worth us going over budget to bring this out now. And it's a digital communication platform. So they're like, we exactly need these things today. You can't operate without this stuff. So being more flexible in that respect.
Yeah, I think the legacy carriers and just most companies in the insurance space are legacy companies, even the smaller agencies and stuff. And it's really hard to innovate when it seems, from what I've seen. I mean, who knows? But anyways, I would say that it's harder with people that the longer you've done something, the harder it is to change things, right? Yeah. Where it's like, if you're coming fresh into something, it's like, I'm not even going to do any of that stuff. I'm going to do it this way because this way's the best. You know what I mean? You don't even think about the old way. Right. It's just interesting how that all plays out with insurance, especially moving forward. And now this year, it's like everybody's like pedal to metal.
Yeah. It's all been turned up to 11 now. Totally.
Yeah.
And
to 11.
Yeah. I do see that in the agency space a lot. So, there's a lot of agencies that, maybe it's been a family business. They've done really well, but the next generation isn't necessarily interested. Right. And so you see, that's even harder for them to change then. And then you've got some like 30-something agents who, age-wise, that are like, we grew up with different tools. And, so they're thinking about agency management systems differently. And they're thinking about how they interact with their insureds differently. So I am seeing this sort of split of like 2 different versions of what an insurance agency looks like. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But I think there is some history in there. And the cool thing is, it doesn't have to be that way. Because I've also seen agents who are 50, 60 something years old that are actually surprisingly digital and nimble. So the flexibility is there. It's a question of all that. It comes back to like culture and attitude.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you're saying. You don't have to be all in or all out. Just you got to start. You got to get on the track so that you're running in the race, even if it's just a little bit here or there. It makes those transitions a lot easier when they're needed, I think.
Yeah. And that's the thing with insureds is like these little moments, it's not about reinventing everything. I mean, that's great, but it's innovating the little moments of interactions with them that their expectations are low. Their desires high, their expectations low. So when you do something that, look, every other industry they interact with as a consumer or as a business, like is already doing it, like digital payments or whatever. When you do that in insurance, they're actually really pleasantly surprised. Like, oh, I can do this all, like I can sign this on my phone. Great. Well, like they've been doing that with lots of other things, but they just didn't think we'd be doing that. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can bring these little pieces of a more modern experience into the equation, And people are pleasantly surprised, and that just lowers the, I mean, going back to that point of how do we move the perception, let's interact with them the way that they wish we were and the way that they are with everyone else in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, that human, it's funny, the further we go with technology, the more the human element is needed. I think too many times we try to go to digital on things, and then it removes the human element out of it, which is the component that really sells or really makes someone feel like they want to be with that company or whatever it is. And as soon as that human element's gone, I mean, it doesn't matter how good the tech is, it's just not going to be the same.
Yeah. And if the process or the tech is a failure, you're setting that human up, no matter how great and empathetic and supportive and knowledgeable they are, you're setting them up to disappoint the customer through no fault of their own.
Right.
So like you could have an incredible agent who knows exactly what they're doing, or an IA who's going out to the property who, you know, they're going to do a great job adjusting that claim, and the insured's going to end up very pleasantly surprised with how much they got stood behind to get their life back together and get their house back together or their car or whatever. But, you know, they don't have a drone, they're this and so it's like it takes forever. And, you know, there's lots of back and forth, not because that IA wasn't capable, but because they didn't have any of the tools they needed to make that a painless experience for their human side to shine through. So these are, to me, like enabling and facilitating are probably the two, like kind of meaning the same thing, but like those are the words I look for when I'm like, well, what tech can we use? It's not about replacement of insurance. It's about making the intention of that coverage come through loud and clear, which is removing the painfulness of the process.
Love it. That is a good way to look at it. Well, so you've done an incredible amount of research for your book. What would you say is, I mean, what's on the horizon? What is the one thing, if you had to pick one thing that you're super optimistic, excited about the future that you see as a common thread throughout all these companies and everything? What would that be?
So I don't think there's a particular coverage or innovation to point to. And part of that is because I was spanning like commercial and personal and small and big and you know, a lot of different spaces. And there's a story like that in each one of them. But what I do see is the kind of points that I was saying about like your customers and your staff, there does seem to be a movement in the industry to get there. And part of it's sparked by, you know, employee engagement is much more important, and like all the HR survey worlds, like they're all focusing on that. So I think that's helping. I think the generations that are making up the majority of the workforce, as that shifts to one with maybe higher expectations and interest in themselves, that will also lead to maybe pushing for more employee engagement and like voicing, because they, you know, millennials tend to speak up, like voicing their desires for what they want. So I think that also will shift us in terms of our openness to change. But then the whole design thinking movement, that's something that's pervading lots of industries, and it is spreading in insurance. It's still not across the board, but that's becoming much more common. And that is a few really important principles. One of them is about speaking firsthand to the customer and hearing from them directly, which is like, that's my first rule. So, you know, as that becomes a more common way of looking at problems or opportunities, it's going to help enhance the connectivity to the customer. And it has mechanisms for what you do with what you hear. So it's not just like, oh yeah, we asked them. Now, anyway, let's get back to this thing that we care about. It's like, well, you asked them, and that needs to now define the whole process. So, you know, going through a customer journey map forces you to really think about each piece of the process and what their life looks like relative to you. That's not a perspective many carriers historically have taken. So some of these tools that are becoming, I mean, like Skiff trained every single employee in the company, like administrative assistants, everyone, not just underwriters and the innovation people. They all got trained on design thinking, like even with the unions. That's wild. But imagine, and so all their people ended up participating in these, not workshops, but kind of like little innovation boot camps, and then came up with ideas, and they created a portfolio of all these innovative ideas that their people came up with, and they've implemented over half of them. Like that's not I mean this in a good way, but like that's not normal.
Right. Yeah.
Right? For our industry or any. So that just speaks to like that's a groundswell movement. And that has changed. When you talk to people there, the energy for a state-owned carrier of last resort, monoline, like you can describe them any way you want. That just sets you up to expect even less of the energy that's there. But those people are so energized and driven to where they're taking the company. And I can say the same for pretty much anyone in the book, it's only 7, so I can say that for all 7, but I am seeing that more and more across the board. So that's what excites me, because it's what comes out of that that's going to be really interesting. And I know that's not specific or what you're actually hoping for, but that's just the truth. Like, I don't know the specifics because no one really does.
Right.
But the basis to come up with those things and do something with them, that's what's getting me energized.
I love it.
Well, Bryan, that's so awesome. Bryan Falchuck, the future of insurance from disruption to evolution, on Amazon now. We'll put the link down at the bottom. It's a must read if you're in this business. And I think if you're listening, you are in this business. So, hey, we appreciate you coming on. We will get you on the next book.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, great catching up.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Great
guys.
catching up. See ya.
Hey, you've got to check out the Insurance Dudes Inner Circle, coming soon, where you get extended interviews as well as live coffee talks in our private Facebook group. Join the mailing list today at theinsurancedudespodcast.com. Hey, thanks for checking out The Insurance Dudes. Hey, please subscribe. We got some really great stuff coming out.